On this episode of Newt's World, President Trump's decision to use B-2 bunker buster bombs on 3 key Iranian nuclear facilities over the weekend brought a ceasefire to the conflict between Israel and Iran. But will the ceasefire last? And how has the conflict begun to reshape the Middle East? Here to discuss Israel's reaction to the U.S. bombings and the ceasefire agreement, I'm really pleased to welcome back my guest, Yaakov Katz. He is the former editor-in-chief of the Jerusalem Post, author of the upcoming book, While Israel Slept, How Hamas Surprised the Most Powerful Military in the Middle East, which is available for pre-order now. And he is, I think, one of the most insightful and remarkably informed analysts on the entire region. Yaakov, welcome and thank you for joining me again on Newt's World.
It's great to be with you, Mr. Speaker.
So let's begin with, from an American perspective, the biggest headline, which is President Trump authorizing B-2 bombers to strike the Iranian nuclear facilities. What was your reaction when you heard the news?
Well, I thought that when the president made that decision and those B-2 bombers flew from Missouri all the way to the Middle East and to Iran and dropped those GBU-57 bunker busters over Fordo, the secret enrichment facility that Iran had built into a mountain near the city of Qom, as well as over Natanz, the main uranium enrichment facility, and then some Tomahawk missiles from submarines that were parked off the coast of Iran. To me, it was a historic day because what it showed was finally there's a president who, after so many who have promised over the years not to allow Iran to obtain a nuclear weapon and had consistently and constantly taken that red line, we won't let them enrich uranium. And then when they enriched uranium, we said we'll only let them enrich uranium to low levels. And then when it went to 20%, the world said, well, not to 60%. And then when it went to 60%, the world said, well, not to 90%. And finally, someone understood that what was happening here, and this was what was obvious to everyone, and you know this, sir, is that there is no uranium enrichment to 60% unless it is for a nuclear bomb. And it was time for the Iranians to be taught that they cannot continue to wreak havoc in the world with their proxy army and to illicitly try to obtain a nuclear weapon. And I think that what the president did will go down in history as a projection of power, but also as an important lesson to rogue states that they can't get away with trying to develop weapons of mass destruction.
It was fascinating to me that in the initial campaign, and I thought there was a certain artistry to Trump offering Iran 60 days to come to the table, and on the 61st day, Israel struck. I'm presuming that Netanyahu and Trump had some kind of understanding. I thought the Israeli military and the Israeli intelligence service collaborated with astonishing effectiveness. Weren't you a little surprised at how thoroughly they came to dominate the region and how decisively they were targeting specific key Revolutionary Guard and other military leaders?
100%. We had been hearing about Israeli planning for a potential strike against Iran for about the larger part of the last 25 years. And we know that in that period, Israel has attacked Syria's nuclear reactor. You and I have spoken about this in the past. And Israel, back in 1981, famously destroyed the Osirak reactor outside of Baghdad that Saddam Hussein was building. But for Iran, it was a long time of planning and of Israel considering its options and really preferring diplomacy. But over the years, it perfected a strike package, really the likes of something that I don't think we ever could have imagined. I mean, if we look at what happened on June 13th, when Israel launched its attack, it split up its targets into 3 different categories. Category number 1 was taking out all the air defense systems in Iran, basically open up the skies, take control of Iranian airspace. I call it not aerial superiority, aerial sovereignty is what Israel created over Iran by taking out all of the missile defense systems, all the radar installations, basically what it allowed for. I mean, think about this. We had 12 days of operations, over 1,500 Israeli Air Force sorties over Iran, not a single plane shot down. I mean, it's remarkable. right? When you think about what Israel was up against in the run-up to all of this. So that itself is a remarkable accomplishment. The second category was the ballistic missile stockpiles and launchers. Iran does not have an air force. Its air force is outdated. It's antiqued. It's based on old planes that it bought from the United States, like Phantoms back in the 1970s before the Islamic Revolution in 79. It's got some Russian aircraft, but nothing that really presents a challenge to a formidable air force like the Israeli one. So what they had invested all of their money and scientific research in was ballistic missiles, and they've developed sophisticated ballistic missiles. Before this operation, they had about 3,000 of them, and maybe another 500-600 launchers. And by the way, they had planned to launch hundreds of ballistic missiles at a time at Israel. In total, over 12 days, they were able to fire 500 missiles into Israel, 90% of those intercepted by Israeli missile defense systems, backed by the American THAAD that had been deployed here already during the war that erupted after October 7, and Aegis ships that were also docked off the coast of Israel in the Mediterranean, the East Med, that also helped in the interceptions. So you saw also the degrading and the weakening of their missile capability. Within that category was also this remarkable operation called Operation Narnia, where the Israeli Air Force, together with its intelligence services, took out, in the span of just a few minutes, 15 of the top nuclear scientists in Iran, the ones who were working on the most sophisticated and complicated components of a nuclear weapon, as well as commander of the Iranian military, commander of the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, the IRGC, commander of the air defense systems, commander of the Air Force, and a slew of other top military commanders, over 20 top military commanders in Iran knocked off. What that does is it disrupts, it creates chaos in the whole chain of command and in the command and control system. So who gives the orders? What do we do? Who attacks? How do we attack? And then, of course, was the third category. Once you created aerial sovereignty, once you've disrupted their offensive capabilities and their ability to command and control themselves, then Israel started to go after the nuclear sites. And again, its focus, and this is important for people to understand, its focus was not on removing Iran's nuclear program. There's a reactor, for example, called Bushehr, which is a nuclear reactor that the Iranians still have. Israel did not attack that reactor. That's a civilian energy reactor. Let them have it. Israel's focus was on the uranium enrichment program, because that has only one purpose, and that is for the purpose of nuclear weapons. So it went after three key facilities, the same ones that Donald Trump ordered the B-2s to bomb. Natanz, the main enrichment facility where thousands of centrifuges are located in multiple chambers on multiple levels underground. The Fordo facility, which Israel had difficulty penetrating on its own. It was unclear how it was going to do that. And the third facility is Isfahan, where they did the uranium conversion. So they took the raw uranium, turned it into the gas that was fed to the centrifuges, got it back from the centrifuges, and eventually would have turned it into the metal, which is what would make a nuclear bomb. So those three categories, and you look at what Israel was able to do, it's a pretty remarkable operation.
Given the Israeli air dominance, to what extent did you actually need the U.S. to come in with its very heavy bombs?
Look, Israel has very impressive capabilities, but Israel's aircraft and its bombs, its bunker busters, are not the most advanced in the world. The most advanced in the world are the B-2 bombers and the GBU-57s, what are also known as the MOPs, the Massive Ordnance Penetrator. It's about a 13-ton bomb that has the ability to penetrate as deep as about 100 feet, if not more. The Fordo facility, which is built into a mountain, and it's unclear exactly how deep down it is. The Iranians don't exactly publish their blueprints online, but we have heard from Rafael Grossi, who's the Director General of the IAEA, the UN's nuclear watchdog. He has said that it's about half a mile underground. Other intelligence estimates talk about it being anywhere from about, 80, 90 to 150 meters. So about, let's say, 200 yards or so underground. Whatever it is, it's very deep into a mountaintop. What we've seen, if we look at satellite images, we see that there are access roads, 2 access roads that go into a mountain. But then the facility is deeper inside the mountain. So how to penetrate a mountain is not something that's so easy to do. That's number one. Number two is Natanz. While Israel's bunker busters were able to penetrate definitely the first levels of the underground chambers, there was the lowest level that there were some questions of whether Israeli bombs were able to get in there. One thing that Israel did do, and the IAEA even said this, was that Israel bombed the power plant that was feeding the electrical current to the centrifuges in Natanz. And that likely caused damage to the centrifuges themselves. Just so people understand, centrifuges, these kind of steel, round, circular-looking machines where the uranium spins around, they're very delicate. So any little change to their motor or their rotor or even the electrical current could knock them out. But it's all better to have complete destruction. And as the president himself has said, the B-2 bombers, together with the Israelis, succeeded in obliterating. So after all the damage that Israel did, came the B-2 bombers. They dropped a dozen. There were 7 in total. 6 of them, each carrying 2 bombs, 2 GBU-57. 6 dropped their 12 payload of bombs into the mountain where Fordo is located. One of the aircraft dropped 2 bombs into Natanz. And then the Tomahawks were fired also at Natanz, but also at Isfahan. Again, we don't have images of what's happening inside, and the Iranians, of course, want to downplay it and pretend as if the damage was not extensive. But when you look at the satellite imagery and you see literally like someone punctured a hole in a mountain, you can just imagine what's going on beneath that and underground. And Israeli intelligence assessments, for what they're worth, and I think they're worth something after what we've seen, claim that the destruction is extensive, that Iran's nuclear program has been set back by a number of years.
Unlike the president, I frankly favor regime change because I think as long as you have a theocratic dictatorship that chants death to America and death to Israel, they're going to come back and try to rebuild.
I totally agree with you. And I think that what we have to keep in mind here is that while Israel and America have destroyed infrastructure, buildings, underground facilities, they have not destroyed the ambition, the desire, the motivation, and the ideology to obtain a nuclear weapon. And I'll say even more than that. If I was the supreme leader now of Iran, the Ayatollah Ali Khamenei, and I would say to myself, what is my lesson from this whole experience? I need nuclear weapons because nuclear weapons would give me immunity. Why has no one ever attacked Pyongyang, North Korea? Because they have nuclear weapons. So they have immunity. Why has the world not been able to enforce a no-fly zone over Ukraine in the war with Russia? Because Russia has nuclear weapons. So if I'm Khamenei, my conclusion is I actually need to move faster to get the nuclear weapons. And I'll say one other thing, Mr. Speaker, is that if we look at the 2 previous models or examples when Israel took out nuclear reactors, one of them was in 81, the Osirak reactor I mentioned, that was built for Iraq by the French. In 2007, the Al-Kibar reactor that Bashar al-Assad was building in northeastern Syria was being built for Syria by North Korea. Once each of those reactors was destroyed, for the Iraqis or the Syrians to rebuild, they would have required the French again or the North Koreans again. They did not have a domestic, indigenous, scientific, or academic nuclear physicist infrastructure. They didn't have people of their own who could do it. So they would need to call up their friends and say, hey, can you come? That's another level and layer of complexity and challenge. Iran, it's all local, domestic, indigenous. They have the knowledge. Now, yes, part of the delay is the fact that Israel handpicked key nuclear scientists and took them out, and they have been eliminated. And those people, let's say, were the centers of excellence and the knowledge of certain components that will delay them. But knowledge also can be replaced because they have the academic infrastructure. They have others who have some of that knowledge. They'll be able to rebuild. So everything can be rebuilt and everything can be replaced. So therefore, we really have only two ways to get the Iranians not to rebuild. One of them is exactly what you said. It's regime change. It's for the Iranian people to rise up and topple this violent, oppressive regime. By the way, we've seen over the years how they have tried, right? They're not doing a favor to Israel or the United States. They want freedom because this regime is violent and oppressive to them. Hangs people from cranes in downtown Tehran because of a sexual preference. Beats women on the streets of Iran because they don't cover their hair the right way with a headscarf. Throws political dissidents, journalists in the infamous Evin prison that Israel, by the way, bombed the gates of it during this operation, just as a symbolic message to the Iranian people. But hopefully the Iranian people will be able to take advantage of this opportunity. We'll gain some confidence to do that. But there's also one other alternative, another option per se to try to prevent this rebuilding. And that is a new nuclear deal. And we're starting to see and hear that the president has dispatched his envoy to the Middle East, Steve Witkoff, to try and get those talks again going with the Iranian foreign minister. They had held 5 rounds of negotiations prior to June 13th when Israel launched its attack. And a new deal, which Iran comes to weaker, could potentially get Iran to agree to a deal that they won't have enrichment in Iran. And if that happens, that they don't have enrichment in Iran, we will have bought a longer period and have created a safer and more stable Middle East.
Do you think there's any possibility as part of this conversation that they can be convinced to cut off their support for their various puppets?
I hope, because the people tend to, and this is an important point you're making, people tend to think about Iran just through the prism of their nuclear program. But the fact is that Iran is also the greatest state sponsor of terrorism. I mean, when Israel came under attack on October 7th, when Hamas invaded this country, of course it was a great failure by Israel's intelligence services, by the military, by the government for enacting policies that were wrong, and we now know they were wrong. But this was orchestrated by Iran. When Hezbollah, its most important proxy, the one it had invested billions every year into, started firing missiles the next day on October 8th, this was also per the instructions of their Iranian patrons. And the Houthis, as we're recording this, Mr. Speaker, just a few hours ago, there was a Houthi missile and UAV that was intercepted on its way to Israel. So we're after a ceasefire, and its proxy in Yemen is still launching projectiles and explosive drones at this country. I would hope that that will be part of any negotiation. I would hope that that would be part of any talk that will happen. But I also think that we're today in a new Middle East. October 7th was a great failure, but that's only one side of the coin. In the post-October 7th reality, Israel has re-engineered the Middle East. Let's look at what's happened. Hezbollah is beaten back. Its leader, Hassan Nasrallah, he was like the bin Laden of this region, the most infamous, deadliest, ruthless terrorist leader. He was killed. His successor was killed. His successor's successor was killed by Israel. They lost their long-range missile capability, and everyone by now knows about the famous beeper attack that the Israeli Mossad launched against Hezbollah. Hamas, which unfortunately still holds our hostages, but Hamas has been beaten. It has no real capability to launch an attack inside Israel. And even during a war with Iran over 12 days, Hezbollah comes out and publicly says, you know what? We're not getting involved. Who would have imagined that was possible? I mean, I've been writing about this stuff for 25 years. Okay. Every briefing I would go to in the Israeli military and the Israeli intelligence offices, they would always say, look, when we attack Iran, it's a fait accompli. Hezbollah is going to attack us too. Well, that didn't happen. And not to mention, by the way, I forgot to say, Assad's gone, right? His military's gone. Now, you're right. We have a new guy there. We don't know who he is. Ahmed Ashara al-Julani. Is he good? Is he bad? He was a former al-Qaeda jihadist. Time will tell. But there's amazing opportunity today. So Iran is beaten badly. Its proxies are weak. Its nuclear program degraded. Hopefully this new deal would include all of that together.
Don't you think the Sunni Arab states collectively were all delighted by this outcome?
Without a doubt. Publicly, we have to understand. They have public opinion. They have people on their streets. They're not always going to be the most pro-Israel. So they have to condemn And I think Israel understands that. But privately speaking, I mean, I can tell you just anecdotally, I have spoken over the last 2 weeks since this has been going on with people from states in the Gulf that Israel has relations with and with people from states in the Gulf that Israel does not have relations with. Senior people who were sending messages of support. We're talking about enhancing and strengthening the relations with Israel at a time that we're bombing in Iran, because they understand something very simple. Israel is doing work that they need done because Iran is a threat to them no less than it is a threat to Israel. Iran tries to undermine those Sunni states, the UAE, the Saudis, Bahrain, Qatar, all these other countries, Egypt and Jordan as well, right? People, this kind of flew under the radar, but Israel had to close its airspace during the 12 days of this operation. Couldn't really let planes take off, couldn't let planes land, mostly because it knew that if the Iranians know that Ben Gurion Airport, our international airport near Tel Aviv, is going to be getting planes in and out, they'll hit it with missiles. And God forbid one of those missiles hits a plane, right? That would be very bad. So you had about 50, 60,000 Israelis going through the land borders with Egypt and with Jordan. Quietly, peacefully, no problems. I mean, these are Arab countries. Why aren't they closing their borders with Israel during a time like this, right? They should be standing with their Iranian allies. But that's the truth. The Iranians are not their allies. The Iranians are the dangerous actor in this region, and they understand it. And I think that this is why this really has so much immense opportunity, what has happened here, what it presents us in this region, and where we can go from here. And this is really, it's to the credit of Prime Minister Netanyahu for taking this courageous decision. And it's, I think, greatly to the credit of the president for deciding to join this and really send this collective message to the world, and especially to this region, that we can build up so much amazing opportunities from here.
I was doing Sean Hannity's radio show the other day, and he said that he had a whole number of sources that said we had somehow managed to put non-existent aircraft on the Iranian system, which I assumed was a cyber capability, so that they were actually looking at airplanes that didn't exist when they couldn't see the airplanes that did exist. And I thought all of that was just sort of the world that we're entering.
The technology that we've seen or we've heard of being used and employed during the last 12 days, many stories will still be written about it. The spoofing, that's what Sean Hannity is talking about, of presenting on a radar machine something that doesn't really exist, is a capability that Israel has developed over the years and is a way to blind your enemy so it does not know exactly what's really happening, which aircraft are really coming, and then destroys your radar installations. But what we've seen also with the Mossad operation on the ground, in addition to the Israeli Air Force, which did a remarkable job, the Mossad had built up a network of agents in Iran who deployed drones. It had basically created a drone explosive factory in Iran, and these drones were deployed on that June 13th day and took out missile defense systems, took out radar systems, and took out other capabilities. And then also there were reports that the Iranians were spreading of white pickup trucks that were traveling throughout the streets of Tehran and were apparently dropping off explosive devices at the homes of different people. Now, even whether that's true or not about the trucks, the fact that it sowed such fear within Iran tells you everything. And I've been asked a few times, and I don't know the answer to this, were these Israeli agents, were they Iranians, or were they someone else? I think what we have to assume, and you know this, sir, is that with intelligence agencies like the CIA, like the Mossad, like the really good ones, sometimes when they operate somewhere, they operate, Israeli agents go and do it, American agents go and do it. Sometimes they hire local people to do it for them. But sometimes they could even have people who are doing it for them who don't even know they're doing it for them. They could actually be thinking they're doing it for someone else when they're actually doing it on behalf of Israel, on behalf of the United States.
Well, I mean, the entire project with Hezbollah, where they undercut the market price in order to get them to buy the devices.
Yeah, from a company in Taiwan who didn't even know, the person who sold it in Taiwan and established an office in Romania had no clue that they were even working for the Mossad. It's basically the creation of an alternative reality, a Hollywood production that the people involved don't even know that they are actors in this. So again, I don't know. It could be that these were Israeli agents on the ground. There's a good reason we don't know, by the way, because these people have to be protected, whether they were Israeli or they were not. But it's never as simple as we might think it to be. And it really shows just how impressive, how much was invested in each of these targets, in identifying and locating. I mean, I'll tell you even something else. These nuclear scientists or the IRGC commanders, if you looked at some of those bombings on that initial day, you saw that like they dropped a bomb into a window in an apartment building on the 5th floor, right? They didn't take out the whole building. They took out the room and the corner, like the southwest corner. That means they had to know which apartment the guy lives in, where his bedroom is located in the apartment, and where his bed is probably. Is it on this side of the room or that side of the room? Because they got to make sure the bomb goes into the room and hits. It's a level of granular intelligence detail that we kind of take for granted. But now that we think about it, how much has to be invested? People have to work on each one of these targets over a period of time. You have to track them. You have to learn and study what they do, where they go, who they meet with. It's incredible, the detail of what has been able to be obtained here.
I thought the project where they planted a bomb in the Islamic Revolutionary Guard guest house, in the room which they assumed sooner or later a leader of Hamas would be a guest.
Ismail Haniyeh, yeah.
If you think through the complexities of that, at that moment I thought, if I were the Iranians, I would have a very deep sense of insecurity.
And it could be anywhere. And that's exactly the point. And that's why I do think that the president, to some extent, is right. When I heard him speak at the NATO summit, when he was asked, well, what if they rebuild? And he said, they're not going to rebuild. And, you know, he said that with a lot of confidence, and I hope he's right. But I do think is that if you are the supreme leader, and despite everything we've said before, that your lesson, your conclusion is you need the nuclear weapon. But on the other hand, you now know that they know everything about you, that they are everywhere, they being Israel and the United States, and that they can get you no matter where you are. Do you really want to do it?
There was a brief moment where Trump talked about making Iran great again. But I've talked to several Iranian American billionaires who are very interested in finding a way ultimately to help create a dramatically more prosperous and desirable Iran. And I do wonder, and I noticed in the last few days that the Israelis had begun to shift towards much more focus on the security apparatus, having done the work they were doing on the missiles and the nuclear capability. And I do wonder whether or not at some point, either in a split between the Islamic Revolutionary Guard and the army, or just a sheer mass effort by the people at large, it may not be possible to move beyond the current dictatorship.
What the Israelis did, to an extent, they focused on those initial targets that we spoke about, you know, missile defense, ballistic missiles, and of course, nuclear. But after those main targets were neutralized, they began to also focus on some of the regime targets, military targets, and others. And the idea here was to weaken some of those regime, I would say, arrays and capabilities, whether it's the IRGC or the Basij, which is kind of their more local domestic force that literally beats up people on the streets. That was aimed at trying to give the Iranian people some hope that they can actually go out to the streets and try to bring down this regime. One of the important points that Israel has made, I think, consistently throughout this operation was that our issue is not with the people of Iran. The people of Iran are friends. The people of Iran, we share a rich mutual history. The Persian culture and the history of the Persian peoples, they're an ancient people, really of amazing capabilities and history. But the problem is they've been taken hostage by this radical Islamic entity and these ayatollahs, the mullahs. I mean, you know, you remember, Mr. Speaker, how before the revolution of 79, Israel had an embassy in Tehran, right? I mean, we were all doing business together. We had good friends there. They had good friends here. I mean, that all changed when Khomeini came back from Paris and really took that country in a whole different direction. And I think that that's what gives a lot of people hope, is that the Iranian people still, for the most part, want to come back to the fold. They want to be part of the free world. And hopefully they can break free of this reign of terror and these tyrants who have been ruling them.
Well, that's our hope. Let me ask you one last topic, which is very different, and I think maybe one of the hardest problems Israel faces. How do you ultimately get to stability in Gaza?
It is still connected because the hope right now in Israel is that by weakening Iran, and Iran was the supplier, the funder, the provider to Hamas, by weakening Iran, you further isolate Hamas. And now Hamas is even more isolated. And therefore, the hope is that we can reach a deal that will see the 50 hostages return. 20 of them are believed to still be alive. The rest are unfortunately, tragically, no longer among the living. But Israel still fights to get back even the bodies of these hostages who have been held by Hamas for nearly 2 years. But really then the question becomes, okay, even if you've done that, how do you prevent Hamas from rebuilding? And again, similar questions and dilemmas to what we were just talking about. And here, what's really needed is the creation of a new governing entity in Gaza. I think everyone understands that. The question is, though, who will that governing entity be? And this is where it gets really complicated. Because the current coalition in Israel, led by Netanyahu, and including some of the more right-wing, far-right parties in Israel, refused to even talk about the prospect or possibility that the Palestinian Authority, led by Mahmoud Abbas in Ramallah, will have any role in the day after in Gaza. On the other hand, the Emiratis and the Egyptians and the Saudis say if there isn't the Palestinians, we're not going to come and help. So you're kind of stuck. And that's the bit of the conundrum at the moment. I think that Netanyahu understands that there really is not an alternative. And I think that hopefully he will show the same courage that he showed when launching this attack on June 13th against Iran. He has the opportunity now to show that same courage and end this war in Gaza. And not only give Israelis the opportunity to heal, because it's difficult for this country to move on. You know, we're talking on a day that 7 soldiers were announced killed in Gaza. Terrible tragedy. Young Israeli soldiers. But the Palestinians have also suffered a great tragedy. We can't ignore that, right? You know, I think it's Hamas's fault. But the people of Gaza suffer. And they deserve a better future as well. So Gaza has to be rehabilitated and rebuilt. And for that, we need a new government. And I don't want to see Israel do it. And I don't think Israel wants to do it, right? We don't want to have control of that place. It's a place that's not friendly to us. But we need to ensure that it is a government, though, that is going to not just rebuild and not just govern, but also de-radicalize. That has to be a piece of this. And if we can really lead to a de-radicalization that would change textbooks, would change newspapers, would change culture, would change the way they talk about us. And that's going to be tough, but it can be done. The opportunities have no limits because that's how you achieve real peace. We got to de-radicalize. So there's a lot of moving parts here, but I think that we need Hamas to agree to ceasefire. We need Hamas to give us back the hostages, and we need our government in Jerusalem to accept the reality that whether we like it or not, there's going to have to be some Palestinian guy who's involved in the day after in Gaza.
Last question. How likely do you think it is that the ceasefire will hold, or is this just a temporary pause?
I think it will hold as long as Iran does not try and rebuild, or we don't get intelligence that shows that they're working on a bomb somewhere in a basement. Israel has achieved its goals of this operation, and that was to set back Iran's nuclear program for a number of years, and that seems to have been achieved. But the Iranians now, the ball's in their court. And I think that that's why it's so important that the president doesn't lose focus, because sometimes that can happen. You finish one thing and you jump ready to the next thing. I don't blame him. He's got a lot of different balls up in the air all at once. But we're not done yet with Iran. We need that follow-up, and you know this, sir. Military means really important. They can help get the job done, but they're not alone going to get the job done. You need to have that political process that does follow up. And this is the opportunity now. They're weak, they're hurt, they're bleeding. Get them back to the table, squeeze them for a better deal, give them some carrots along the way. But you got that big stick you can still hold and say to them, listen, if you guys don't play ball, what you saw with those 7 B-2 bombers and those 12 or 14 GBU-57 massive ordnance penetrators is just the beginning.
In the ability to crush the regime, we have massive capabilities if we have to. This is, I think, potentially the turning point which could potentially lead to a dramatically better Middle East. I think we still have to roll up our sleeves and recognize it. There's a lot of work between here and getting an Iran which is sustainable as a neighbor and not slipping back into the theocratic dictatorship's desires to destroy Israel and the United States. But I want you to know, Yaakov, that I want to thank you for joining and providing an update, and I will continue to read virtually everything you write. And I want to remind our listeners that your new book, While Israel Slept, How Hamas Surprised the Most Powerful Military in the Middle East, is available for pre-order from Amazon right now and will be out this September. And once it comes out, I'd love it if you could come back and discuss both the book and wherever we are at that point in the process. But thank you. You were a remarkably helpful student of what's going on in the Middle East.
Thank you, sir. It's always a pleasure and honor to be with you.
Thank you to my guest, Yaakov Katz. You can learn more about the Israel-Iran conflict on our show page at newtsworld.com. Newt's World is produced by Gingrich 360 and iHeartMedia. Our executive producer is Garnsey Sloan. Our researcher is Rachel Peterson. The artwork for the show was created by Steve Penley. Special thanks to the team at Gingrich 360. If you've been enjoying Newt's World, I hope you'll go to Apple Podcasts and both rate us with 5 stars and give us a review so others can learn what it's all about. Right now, listeners of Newt's World can sign up for my 3 free weekly columns at gingrich360.com/newsletter. I'm Newt Gingrich. This is Newt's World.